The book ends with Yin presenting the sword to Tixile and Miss Yan betrusted to Wen Song, the eldest son of Desire Fin. Li Mubai and Yu Zilian went to Juwo Mountain to study acupoint pressing. As time goes by, it is more than 3 years in a flash. At this time, young girl Yan has married Wen Zong. She has let go of her feet and changed her flag. She has become a young grandmother of the Di family. Although she suffered from the death of her grandfather, the tragic death of her brother-in-law and the distant marriage of her elder sister, she shed tears when she shed tears, but she is still happy when she is happy. She often jumps and jumps, not like a new daughter-in-law. Fortunately, Granny Dida is a very cheerful person. She treats her daughter-in-law as her own daughter-in-law. She has never been a bit harsh. By this time, Yan Zhengtang, the famous sphere of Yanqing, had arrived in Beijing. He opened a Guangxin dot shop in Maishi Street, Kinmen. He lived in Beijing with several apprentices. His business was second to none, mainly to protect his old friend Desire Fin. Although Desire Fin was still living at home, he was always afraid that Zhang Yujing and Mao Zenshan's party members would come to fight for revenge. Therefore, in addition to the fact that he did not dare to put aside the skill of Iris and he also told his sons not to forget the saber technique taught by Yu Zilian earlier, and asked Yan Zhengtang to come every 3 days to teach his son and daughter-in-law shooting skills in the house where Yu Zilian lived earlier. Although Yan Zhengtang's shooting skills are not the first in China, they are rarely matched. The famous silver spear general Qu Guanchao, as shooting skills were taught by him. The gun he used is a real pear flower gun, which is also known as Yan family gun in Japan. In the Song dynasty, there was a famous general, Li Kuang, known as Li Tigang. Li Kuang's wife, Yan, had a very good shooting technique and was very popular. Therefore, although the pear flower spear is unpredictable, it is a kind of female gun in ancient times, which can be learned by weak women. Yan Zhengtang and his grandmother Di Shao are Yan's and Yan Zhengtang's adoptive father. Therefore, Yan Suteng is very happy to teach them. In less than half a year, Miss Yan has made great progress in her skills. As for her husband, Wen Long, however, because of his weak body and his disposition of Wen rather than Lu, he fell behind her. It was early winter and October, and the weather in Beijing was already very cold. Yan Zhengtang is still wearing a blue cloth, single trousers jacket. He holds a gun in both hands and dances, with pear blossom waving his head. He said to young girl Yan and Wen Zong, "Look, the pear flower is swinging on has to protect the body and to remove the enemy's weapons. Look." Miss Yan looked at it. She couldn't see the swing of the gun. She saw the silver light on the gun head. It was like pear blossoms. Yan Zhengtang also changed his gun thing. His practice is pulling grass to find snakes is no bad, and civet catching mice is good. Fan Zha sank and twisted him to earn money. He raised his spear and found his double flowers. Feigned defeat and returned to the golden toad. The shadow of the gun flew. The wind whistled. When he was practicing here, he suddenly heard someone clapping his hands. and sighed with a smile. It's really high. What a magic gun Yan Zhengtang was. 1 Yan San in the year of the Asian Games. Yan Zhengtang stopped the gun and said, with a smile, "Are you here, Yan?" Young girl Yan and Wen Zhuang all came. To greet the man, "Uncle Liu, have you eaten yet?" The man bent down and said with a smile, "Just used it, master. Practice martial arts with your grandmother. Don't let me disturb you." He was in his 30s, short in stature, but with broad shoulders and strong waist and legs. He was wearing a small blue satin jacket, blue silk trousers, and a large blue satin padded jacket. The button is not buttoned, but a silk scarf with blue and white flowers is tied around the waist. The waist is tight, but the collar is open. A braid on his head, loosely combed, white face, triangular eyes, small nose, always smiling face. This man is a famous hero in Beijing for nearly 12 years. His surname is Liu, his name is Taibao, and his nickname is a lotus flower. He was Yan Zhengtang's cousin, Yan Qing. He had learned pear flower spear from his cousin earlier, and had been a dark guard for 2.5 days. However, he was addicted to orange and gambling. He was obscene and often stole money from Yan Zhengtang, so he was driven away by Yan Zhengtang. It was more than 10 years after he left. Yan Zhengtang did not know his life or death, and he was almost forgotten. However, he suddenly appeared in Beijing last spring. He first visited Liza Meant Q Guanchao. He claimed that he had come to Beijing to find Lei Mubai to compare martial arts. Because Lei Mubai was not in Beijing, and no one paid attention to him, he wandered on the street, fighting with people. Later, Yan Zhengtang found out and called him to the dart shop. Seeing that he had been wandering for more than 10 years and had learned a good martial arts, he was asked to be a dart leader. He didn't want to do it. He was still hanging around in the street. One day, probably on purpose, he attacked more than a dozen scoundrels alone in the street, bumping into little iron Baylor's sedan chair. Seeing that he was very good at martial arts, he took him back to his house. When asked, he knew that he was the cousin of Yan Zhengtang, who had just come to Beijing for the purpose of meeting Lei Mubai. He laughed and left him as a boxing teacher in the mansion. In fact, Tixile Vale has become a prominent figure in the imperial court. He no longer plays with swords and spears, eagles and horses. Liu Taibao had nothing to do. He closed 3 taels of silver a month, so he dressed himself up to be rich. All day long, he chatted in the Choil Tavern, fighting against injustice and interfering with his own business. Therefore, less than 2 years since I came to Beijing, no one in Beijing knows the name of a lotus flower. Every 3, 6, 9, he came here to see his cousin teach martial arts. Now he came again. Yan Zhengtang said, "You can see it, but you can only stand on one side and not talk much." Liu Taibao laughed. Wen Zhuang and little girl Yan and little girl